Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Perimeter Security and Why It is Obsolete. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Justin Henderson, SANS Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Justin.
Thanks, Carol. All right, everybody. Hopefully you're at the right webcast, Perimeter Security and Why It is Obsolete. So in this talk, basically what I'm wanting to do is start the first part of a three-part series. The first one based on perimeter security, and then we're going to have two more parts, one on data-centric security and one on zero-trust security. All three of these are basically a combination of strategies, mindset leveling, and implementing techniques, both preventative and detection, with a specific purpose. The most common strategy deployed today, unfortunately, is still the perimeter security. Now, I could be one of those fans that say perimeter security is dead. I feel like that's a little bit of an overstatement. It is obsolete, but it is not dead. There is a small distinction there. The difference is we still need it. It's just insufficient. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this talk is why is it obsolete? Why is it insufficient? And with that, so my name is Justin Henderson. A little bit about me. I am the author of SANS SEC 555 SIM and Tactical Analytics. I'm the co-author of 455 SIM Design and Implementation. And I'm the co-author of SEC 530 Defensible Security Architecture, which is what this webcast is based on. I am a SANS GSE. I have over 60 certifications. Basically, I don't have any life other than doing this stuff. I love what I do. It's just who I am. So I'm absolutely a hobbyist, and I love to give things away for free. You know, this webcast is one example. I also have tons and tons of stuff available on my GitHub. So I usually throw this up. If you have questions or if you want to have this back up at the end, I'll try to re-put this on there. But I have a lot of open source projects, a lot of documentation, a lot of different things that I put in this GitHub. So with that, let's go ahead and start. So this webcast is kind of unusual for me. It's unusual in that we're going to go technical. We're going to go into a few things. But for the most part, I'm going to throw a bunch of things out there at you, and I'm not actually going to give you the answer. I'm going to basically tell a story on why the perimeter is insufficient. What are its core weaknesses? Why is that mindset wrong? And realistically, in the next two parts, the ones on data-centric and zero-trust, we're going to talk about how to fix those weaknesses. So then the question, I guess, is why do you even stay on this webcast? Why do you not just drop off? Well, one, hopefully because you like me. That's always helpful. But two, really what I want to do is I want to get these things through your head as to we still need a perimeter. We still need to have things like next-gen firewalls and IDSs. But how are they being used? I don't want to say improperly, but not fully sufficient. So I want to give you these in analogies that you can take back to management to better define this problem, as well as to start thinking about how to implement these in different ways. So in SEC 530, basically a lot of that course is all about, you know, here's a next-gen firewall, here's how it's traditionally deployed, but man, that's just not good enough. So let's try to implement it in different ways because it's one of the best technologies that we have among other technologies, but we're going to have to change how we're implementing it. And so this is kind of the analogy after analogy to help you hopefully drive that story home, understand it yourself, as well as share it with others. So, okay, just right off the bat before we go too deep, what exactly is perimeter security? And this is a high-level definition. This is basically the concept of having a traditional perimeter. So we have the internet in the top right that is completely untrusted because why would you trust anything on the internet? You don't know where it's been. It's like picking up a sucker that dropped on the pavement and it's got dust and who knows what else in it, and your kid wants to pick it up and eat it anyway. No, 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 no. We don't know where that's been, therefore no. So, but then on the inside of our network, it's like in your house. It's the internal side. It's you have to get through the front door or through the back door on the porch. We trust everything in there. We say it's our network. But is it really? So it's a pretty simple concept. If you're on the outside of the network, say the internet, it's untrusted. You're on the inside of the network, you're trusted. I'm going to kind of tie this back to the old school castle and moat design because it's kind of really more what perimeter security was based for. And that just doesn't work today in a modern environment. So think of this as you have a castle. If you have a castle, you have the nice moat around it to protect from people trying to just attack you from all sides. You've got the walls, really tall brick stone walls so that the enemy can't just pound right through. You've got all these different things. And that would be great if it wasn't 2018. Because the problem is in 2018's attacks have matured, they've adopted. The question is, have we? Have we changed our methods to protect ourselves from modern day attacks? So I'm going to start by going through some assumptions about perimeter security that are just unfortunately incorrect. Now, let's start with number one. One thing with perimeter security is this concept that I need to build up a strong wall or a strong gate because I'm going to be attacked from the front. You see, back in the day, we would have tons of server-side attacks. If you had something out on the internet, if it wasn't in a DMZ, it was expected it's going to be compromised, flat networks, all the funness. So we built that moat, we built those walls, we stuck our data on the inside of the castle. The enemy comes at us with a battering ram, they're beating against the wall, and you scoff at them. Ha 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 ha. My next-gen firewall is totally going to prevent this from happening. And you feel secure, you feel safe. The untrusted enemy on the outside is not getting on the inside. They're not stealing your data. But the problem is, that's just not how information warfare works nowadays. And even on the server-side attacks, I'm going to pick on both client-side and server-side attacks with perimeter security. I'm just starting with the most overt server-side. So again, if you're not familiar with server-side, that's basically you pound directly at the application and you try to exploit it or do whatever to it. So you put things in front of these. You put the firewalls. You put all the different technologies in front to protect from the untrusted network. Even that itself, though, is somewhat an effort and futility. For example, if we have the most precious thing of the kingdom, the princess, and she's up in the tower, the problem is you think, well, you have to get through the castle gates, across the moat, all this, into the castle, fight everybody off, climb to the top of the tower, and steal her. But then we have things like web attacks. Web applications are custom. There's thousands of entry points on a modern application, and they have access to critical data. Like, I know we like harping on companies like Equifax and other things, and I get things like SQL injection and other are basic, but I can't tell you how many times I've been on the other end of a security assessment where I've been the one performing SQL injection against a company who actually takes security really serious. And it's unfair. It's unfair to say, oh, your developers don't know what they're doing and you don't have the right technologies tuned and blame them for everything, when the truth is there's thousands of entry points into a web application. There's all the different input variables, there's contact forms, there's application forms, there's user agents. Like, that's not exactly a fair assessment. I know many organizations that do a really good job at security, but securing web applications is difficult. So in this case, a perimeter style security is just that one technique, that one firewall, even a web application firewall may not be sufficient. I get there's trust and there's untrust and you're doing what you can, but we have to stack the deck in our favor, because in this case, or in this slide, basically, the dragon flies over the top of the castle, reaches in, grabs the princess, and off she goes. There goes all your precious, in this case, data. So part of what we're going to be talking about in data-centric security, or even in zero trust, the next webcast, is basically how do we begin to start stacking the deck? Because it seems like I'm being unfair and cherry picking, but I'm not. Again, I do this for a living. I'm a security consultant by day, SANS instructor by night. I do research. These type of attacks, getting data, attacks in through the untrust to the trust, as well as getting data from trust to untrust, is somewhat of an unfair battle. There's just multiple ways of doing it. So this one's server side. Let's flip to the other side for a second. The other assumption we make with the perimeter security is this concept I'm just going to call the evil insiders. It's that if someone's on the inside of the castle and they steal the king's gold and they're going to run out across the drawbridge, that you're going to detect that because, wow, I don't know, they have a sack of gold on their back, they're running, and they just look like a thug. But it doesn't work like that either, because that assumes you can identify evil insiders. Now, I'm not talking the insider threat or anything like that. Let's ignore this terminology for a second. A perimeter security system, again, is focusing on untrusted accessing trust or trust leaving to go to untrust. So here what we're really saying is network-based DLP, application control rules, or different things that are saying, hey, I know that looks evil, therefore I'll prevent it from happening. Now, big problems here. Even things like application control, which I'm a huge fan of, there's pretty easy ways to get around that. All I have to do is write a legitimate application, such as Facebook. If Facebook's blocked, maybe I'll try GitHub. If GitHub's blocked, maybe I'll try Outlook Web Access or Google Drive, or you can try all these different applications. Well, okay, what happens if those are listed to hard-coded URL categories? You're not allowed to go to any of those. Well, then there's attacks like domain fronting. Domain fronting is where I set a user header and different attributes to make it look like I'm accessing a site, say Microsoft, when actually I'm checking in with a command and control server. And it tricks it, and especially if you're not using SSL inspection, have fun trying to find that. It's very difficult. Again, it's a difficult task. But the bigger issue with perimeter security isn't one that you can't find the evil insider going out. It's that you can't even tell that the insider has now become evil because even they don't know they're evil. Let me clarify this. Think about it like this. You have an evil sorcerer who places a spell on a peasant. They place a spell on the peasant. The peasant is now under mind control or hypnosis, whatever you want. And they say, hey, go get me the king's gold. So that peasant goes back into the castle. He's cleaning it up. And while he's there, he just decides to pocket all that gold. Then he just walks directly across the drawbridge because he is an authorized user. Gives the sorcerer the gold, and then the sorcerer later removes the spell, and he has no clue that he even did it. This is more of the problem. Perimeter security assumes you know how the data is going to go in or out, and you control it. Well, if you have kids, you probably understand that you really can't control them. You can try to limit their movement. You can control a few things, but realistically, they're individual people. I say that as a father. It's a fun and challenging task. So, on the inside of your network, the problem is your assets get compromised. Nobody knows they're compromised. The asset, even with antivirus and all the other technologies, does not know this. And it's doing things, stealing data, pivoting, and a lot of it's just logins. Like, ask any pen tester. You basically get a box, you steal credentials, you pivot, you steal credentials, you pivot, you steal credentials, you pivot. The problem is, at that point, everything looks like authorized logins in use. That is a very challenging task to find out. So what you're not really looking for is the evil insider. You're looking for the anomalous insider. But that opens a whole nother can of worms, because anomalous could be things like, oh, let's go buy UBA products or UEBA products and do machine learning and all this. And while those technologies are great, as a 555 instructor, I got to say, Most organizations are not mature enough for those, and they need to be falling back on more simple monitoring techniques that work very well, and in many cases, much better. So again, multiple issues going on here. Another main assumption with perimeter security is that this concept of what's coming. It's designed for example, I'll keep falling back to the next-gen firewall because it's more easy to understand. I know I'm going to be attacked in a certain way, so I have tons and tons of signatures to identify. We have things like intrusion prevention, application control, URL filters, antivirus, all of this stuff, DLP. In the castle, this would be more like you have knights. Knights are designed to attack the goblins. Archers take care of the orcs. You've been fighting wave after wave after wave of all these different creatures, all these known attack vectors, and then, on the 304th attack wave, all of a sudden a giant starts walking across the hill. And then it's like, uh-oh, we don't know how to deal with that. And it's game over at that point. So the problem is we have to have, even with these technologies, which we want, we have to have things on top of it. We have to have things like a detection. We have to have heavy emphasis on detection because prevention is eventually going to fail. That's not being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic when I say that. And if you think that, that's fine. I forgive you. I forgive you for being wrong. Prevention is great. And if I could have that, I would totally get it. Since I know it won't always work, I will fall back to detection as well, and then I will use the combination of them to win. The difference is in perimeter security, it's almost like once they get past the perimeter, oh, we lost. But that itself is a false assumption. It's when the adversary gets put on your network, it's not game over, it's game on. Okay? So, difference in mindset. So, okay, what do I mean more specifically with these known attacks? We have things like web proxies. We have things like next-gen firewalls. We have things like intrusion detection systems. Heck, even in some aspects, malware sandboxes still use signatures. So we have all this data going in and out. They're doing full-on layer 7 application inspection. That is great, but again, it's insufficient. As an example, think about this. Let's say you only allowed web traffic to authorized sites. Like you had a whitelist, everything was up there. One, whitelist URL categories or even specific sites are still subject to attacks like domain fronting. But then we have other issues. The internet requires DNS to function as intended. Therefore, you could use an attack called DNS tunneling. In DNS tunneling, DNS servers are proxy by design. There's recursion. Therefore, I could bypass perimeter security and have command and control or data exfiltration over DNS. And it is super duper simple to achieve. I don't even have to download software. There's a PowerShell script wrote specifically to do this without installing applications. There's better ones like DNS clients, but you get the picture. Again, I don't want to say perimeter security is dead. It's just insufficient. We need it plus more. We need to stack the deck in our favor. So, okay, a different example of this. Intrusion detection sensors. I love network security monitoring. I love having me a good IDS. I just happen to not like most of the configurations or the default settings. For example, external net in many organizations or in many commercial solutions for an IDS or an IPS, intrusion prevention or intrusion detection, is configured to look for anything that is not an internal RFC19 IP, basically not an internal IP. So this means you might have 50,000 signatures, and 50,000 signatures will work really, really well for attacks going into or out of your environment. But if I do something from something on the inside to something on the inside, those 50,000 signatures all of a sudden don't do anything. Wah, wah, right? That's like sad. That you should cry about that, right? So that means the fix for that is we can do stuff like set external net to something like any. Basically, it's like everybody's untrusted. Except for now we just caused an entirely brand new issue. In that, now you have 50,000 different rules that all need tuned because some of them were truly not intended for internal to internal. But if you don't do that, you're going to have huge blind spots on the inside of your network. So again, they're default tuned for this. And I want to clarify this even more. So think about it this way. Let's go back to, again, next-gen firewall and intrusion detection server. We have these two systems. They're on your environment. If I go from an HR machine to an IT machine and I run known exploits, there's a good chance the IDS won't see it, and there's a good chance the next-gen firewall won't do anything about it either. Because they've been generically tuned to work in every environment with an emphasis on internal to external or external to internal rule sets, whether that's signature or even layer 4 type things. So again, it's not that those technologies are broken. We still need them, but we're going to have to tune them to also account for the internal to internal. And all of a sudden we take technologies that were already pretty darn cool to, man, that's just sweet and awesome. That's what we're going to have to do. Okay, then I'm going to say maybe potentially the most important assumption with perimeter security is this concept of visibility. You see, in the United States, we have this concept of justice is blind. Basically, everybody should be weighed and measured accordingly. But on our cybersecurity network devices, I don't think we should be blind. I'm pretty sure they need full visibility to figure out what's going on. And we have things like GDPR and all these other compliance frameworks that are kind of making life a little bit more complicated. I mean, they're a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. I mean, that's the story of compliance. They're the spirit of good. Sometimes they have bad ramifications. But here's what I'm really getting to. You have a next-gen firewall. I'm going to pick on Palo Alto because I love them. I love Palo Alto. I hate the price tag. This also applies to a FortiGate, a SonicWall, a Cisco ASA, all of those. But let's just pick on Palo. All right, they're commonly known for being pretty solid. Okay, we have things like intrusion prevention. We have URL categorization and inspection. We have web proxy capabilities. We have next-gen antivirus. We have data loss prevention. We have botnet command and control identification and prevention. We have all these cool technologies. Well, one, that's complicated, but the bigger issue is, let's say you just dropped $250,000 on one of these. $250,000, you get all these cool technologies. You might even have like wildfire, sandbox analysis, all of that. That's awesome. And yet, that device, day one, 70% ineffective. Maybe even more now. Why is this? It's because of encryption. We have these perimeter-based controls, and then we have TLS 1.0 through 1.2 and soon to be 1.3, which is going to make this even more complicated. So now we have all those technologies I just talked about, but they don't work for encrypted sites. Like, you can do SSL certificate inspection, but you can't do SSL traffic inspection without setting up true man-in-the-middle via good intent to see the layer 7 payload information. And let me clarify. This means I could do an attack where it looks like I'm hitting like a CDN, such as Cloudflare, but I'm actually just using the DNS namespace to then trick the system into putting it into an authorized category, but I'm actually going somewhere else. But because you're not doing full-on SSL inspection, you can't see what I'm actually doing. That, again, that's domain fronting. It's not an advanced task. You can do it with curl, but without having man-in-the-middle SSL inspection, you have really expensive perimeter controls that might not work for 70% of the traffic they're seeing. You know, this slide basically says 50% of the internet is encrypted. It's actually higher than that now. And again, there's a difference between TLS SMTP uses TLS, so if you want to inspect that, you need SSL TLS inspection. Web traffic is the big one. Web is getting closer to, I think, about 70% at this point, and it's picking up pace rapidly. Because you can get free certificates with things like Let's Encrypt. But again, you just spent $250,000, but you're now using it as a more traditional firewall. Like it's kind of bad. It's a big deal. And I get that politics play into this issue, and depending on where you're at in the world, you have different governing bodies and laws. I understand that. But the truth of the matter that no one can argue is we have these awesome technologies, we spend all this money on it, and we basically make them ineffective, or that's not a fair statement, significantly less effective than with SSL inspection. We basically have to look at doing this different ways. This is where endpoint technologies are becoming so prevalent, which is also not fair because you can see all the traffic on the endpoint, and that's legally allowed, but doing SS special on the network's not, when technically you still have access to the same data, you're just getting it at the endpoint. That's a completely different discussion. I'm not going to go there because otherwise I'll sidebar. Okay. So enough with the core castle analogies. Let's just I want to go to the heart of what we're having with perimeter security. Basically, way too much emphasis on perimeter controls. And then the other problem is the perimeter as we see it, is dead. Not the controls, but the perimeter as we see it. And I'll clarify what I mean there here in a second. Then we have still the concept where organizations are focusing too much on preventative controls, not enough detection controls. It's the concept if I can prevent them from getting on my network, then I win, but once they're on my network, I lose. And it doesn't work that way. Again, it's not game over, it's game on at that point. And let's just dive through some of these, please. So, back in the day, way back in the day, before the internet was the internet as we know it, there was ARPANET. And ARPANET had about 60,000 computers. And then along came one day this little test program. Yeah, I'm just curious what this will do. And we labeled this the Morris worm, released in 1988. But here's what happened. That worm crawled, hit a bunch of machines, infected them. Those machines became infected. They also crawled the network and infected other machines, and on and on and on. But Justin, why does this matter? That was 1988. Who cares? Well, it's the same concept. Today, we have completely flat networks. Now, in this case, this was like a flat network out on the internet. Okay, that's obviously a bad idea. But now what we have is, because of perimeter security focus, the inside of our networks are trusted and they're flat. And when I say flat, I don't just mean like layer 2 flat. Flat can mean a lot of things. I know many organizations that have done a great job at implementing virtual LANs, VLANs, where they're segmenting their network. Here's the HR department. Here's the IT department. Here's accounts payable. Here's the application developer team. Oh, that over there, that's the DMZ. Those are the servers. That's the monitoring network. Like all these awesome networks. But if there's no firewall or there's no control in between all those different VLANs, that's a flat network. Like, I get you know, if I say 10.000/8 and everybody's on that, you'd be like, oh, wow, that's a horrible network design. That's flat. But even when you segment that into chunks, again, if there's no security control, no access controls, no firewalls, no whatever, that is a flat network. That means if I, as an individual, or myself as a worm, some type of automated attack tool, if I can see and somehow find the other assets, and that's not that hard to do, I can spread. So even today, we have the same issue we had back in 1988. It's a flat network. Now, I want to give you proof here. If you don't believe me, look up NotPetya. NotPetya is not the other one. There's Petya. Petya was ransomware. That's still worm-like. It still spreads and encrypts things. I'm talking about NotPetya. NotPetya did this. It would look for a system that was missing the Microsoft MS17-010 security bulletin. This was the security patch for preventing the eternal blue attack. Okay? Now, here's what you would typically see with the worm. It would find a system with that vulnerability, it would exploit it, it would infect that system, it would turn, and it would look for other assets also vulnerable to that patch and spread. So, if you had 1,000 systems and 2 of them were not patched, then you would have 200 infected systems. That's not what NotPetya did. Instead, what it did is it would find one asset, and if it was unpatched, it would compromise it. And if all the other 999 were patched, well, why be bound by vulnerabilities and exploitation? Instead, it would use Mimikatz, steal credentials from memory, and then pivot internally using either PSExec or WMIC. So it's basically exploiting without exploitation. It's moving the malware through all those systems, even though 999 of 1,000 were patched, via logins, which is exactly what pen testers do. They fish or they server-side into a system, and from there, they steal credentials and pivot. So now there are automated attacks, malware, that work the same way our pen testers do, meaning old school defenses like firewalls and even web application firewalls, which, by the way, huge fan of those, but still, all these techniques against trust versus untrusted networks, all of a sudden, they don't look so effective. All of a sudden, a single machine getting compromised can lead to thousands of machines being compromised. I would hope in the next year or two that organizations consistently look at layering their internal structures with prevention and detection controls so they're not flat, so things like NotPetya don't work so well. I don't expect to see that, though. I say that just because it's hard, it's time consuming, and we go from one project to another like a drunken sailor. We're busy, very busy, I understand that. But this is a hard challenge. This is why the perimeter security model is busted. Same concept, still on flat networks. The problem also is, if the inside is trusted, well, once I get on the inside, I can kind of do whatever I want. Like, let's say layer 2. If I'm on the same layer 2 subnet as multiple systems, like multiple desktops, I can do ARP cache poisoning. ARP has no security mechanisms baked in. So part of what we talk about in 530 is, well, the inside's not trusted, and it shouldn't be. So let's either use the switch or router security mechanisms to do things like prevent ARP cache poisoning. Let's do things like private VLANs to do special segments so they can't attack each other. Even at layer 3 and 4, again, ACLs, internal firewalls. There's things we have to be doing that, one, could be preventative, or they could just be awesome detection. Or a lot of times it's both. For example, simple thing here. HR system gets compromised. All right? That's a human resource desktop. Yet that human resource desktop is reaching out and trying to log in to an IT desktop. Well, should an HR machine be logging into an IT machine? That should be a resounding no. I couldn't hear you through my speakers. Probably you guys were all saying it. I'm going to trust that you're still paying attention. No, IT can connect to HR, but HR should never be connecting back to IT and initiating it, which means a simple firewall rule or a host-based firewall rule or an ACL or whatever you put says, hey, this is not allowed, and log it. That's a key thing here. Because now if they get prevented, they also get detected, and you can immediately move, whether that's a manual targeted attack or it's a worm, malware. So again, we got to build this stuff into the inside because the perimeter-based controls are just not good enough. And then that adds one huge issue. The perimeter is dead. When I say that, I don't mean dramatics and all that. I mean literally, your network perimeter isn't really a physical perimeter anymore. It's a logical one, and it's expanded. It's like you started with a castle, but now you have cities and towns everywhere. Your data is all across the land, and you have to protect it, but you don't know necessarily where it's all at. You have things like mobile devices, laptops coming into and out of your environment. You have business partners. You have software as a service. You have platform as a service. You have infrastructure as a service. You have data everywhere, and you have to control it. Well, how do you control it? I don't know. How do you even know what your sensitive data is? Again, these are all very challenging tasks, but you have to solve them because the perimeter as we know it is gone. Or it's there, but it's now a super hyper extended perimeter, and you have to protect it all. Some of the biggest breaches I've been involved in aren't with data being stolen out of the data center. It's data being stolen from assets or systems or cloud services that nobody knew the data was there. But it's still your fault because you have to know about it. So in 530, we spent a lot of time trying to say, here's how we can automatically figure out where our data is, do things like classify it, tag it, or treat it in special ways so that as it moves around, we still know that, and how to interact with some things like cloud services. I mean, things like if on your next-gen firewall you're allowing Gmail, unless you explicitly turn it off, you're also allowing things like Google Docs, Google Drive, and all of that. And even when you have specific app control rules, occasionally they break. How do you know they break? Are you testing them? I don't think I've ever stepped on site to an organization that is auditing their application controls, but you could write a script that does it for you. Again, so lots of perimeter control issues we've got going on here. And that ties very much so to the all prevent defense. We need a balance of prevention and detection. The more preventative controls you have, the less you're actually going to have in detecting on the inside. Well, that's not exactly true. A next-gen firewall is actually one of my favorite detective controls ever. It's just often not used as one. Default outbound deny. Well, if you're not at a default outbound deny, you can't use it as a detection rule. If you are, maybe you can. But you have appliances that are chatting and they're being blocked all day long, but they're vendor ones, so you can't configure them. Just create a new rule that doesn't log that's specific to that traffic you're denying. There are different things we can do. We want to have things like, high horse here, right? Attacks today commonly target desktops, laptops. There's phishing. There's all these different things. Yet, even when there is detection mechanisms, like, like a SIM, it's monitoring your servers. Wait a minute. The attack occurs and is targeting your endpoints, yet you're doing all your monitoring on the servers. Let's go back to NotPetya. NotPetya would attack a system, compromise it, and it would pivot with credentials, which means you better be doing one heck of a fine job doing logon monitoring, because that's what's happening from the desktop to the server environment. It's accessing that critical web application. It's accessing that critical database with authenticated accounts. So if you were to have done monitoring on the endpoint, you could have found 10 different ways of catching that phishing attack, or that, hey, wow, it invoked a PowerShell command out to the internet to bypass antivirus, and here are the 5 different ways you could catch that. But that doesn't work if you're not collecting and using detective controls with an emphasis on modern day attacks. And no, that also doesn't mean when you enable logging on the endpoints that your SIM is going to be so flooded that you need another $1 million. Some of the best detection techniques I talk about in 555 only generate 0 logs until something bad happens, and then it generates a log. Okay, so again, this is a lot of mind setting, and again, the next 2 webcasts will go into more specifics, but this is stuff I'm speaking from the heart, guys, right? I'm trying to be honest here, and I love this stuff. So, all right. Then a disruptive technology is also factored into perimeter security. The concept of Internet of Things, video cameras, toaster ovens, all these different technologies have IP addresses, they're on the internet, they're cheap, and they don't get patched. And even if they do, it is an extremely outdated patch. Brian Krebs on Security, fantastic news reporter for our side of the fence. Like, he represents the information security community, he tells it as he sees it, and yet he suffered a 623 gigabit a second attack using things like CCTV cameras with the Mariah botnet. Basically, massive distributed denial of service attack, because it's easy to compromise these things. Now, that means things like ransomware via distributed denial of service are going to start to be a thing in 2018. It's becoming more common because it's so easy. You can literally pay like $5 and rent someone's botnet and do a DDoS attack. Now, that's not the only issue. These Internet of Things are also on the inside of your network. They're trusted. Remember? External, untrusted, internal, trusted. The problem is the untrusted ones can do DDoS attacks, and it's so much bandwidth you lose anyway. On the inside, these aren't patched, and they're often on networks they shouldn't be. You have like an audio bridge. Here, I'll connect to that. You have a camera. Oh, wow, I'll connect to that. You have these weird devices everywhere. They're not patched, so I could be on your network as a standard user account, and maybe I can't privilege escalate, but I could attack an Internet of Things device, become root, and now I can keep doing more advanced attacks because you gave me a box to pivot off of. So Internet of Things are highly disruptive. Now, don't get me wrong. I love that I can have things like a smart house, but you have to understand the risk that's going with these. They, again, need segmentation, and we're going to have to do special things about DDoS attacks too, because we have to, because it's too easy to do because of Internet of Things devices. All right, almost done, and then we'll open this up for questions. The other thing, perimeter security is heavy network-centric focus. Even organizations that say they're data-centric or do zero trust, they're still doing it with a network-centric approach. This is, I have the next-gen firewall, I put all my time and effort into that, we're good. I do an intrusion prevention server, sensors, all this stuff. Lots of effort in that. But again, modern day attacks go after things like workstations, laptops via phishing. They move around internally, which means we need more host-based controls. And I'm not saying rush out and buy something. Don't get me wrong, tools like Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, all those different EDR technologies, application whitelisting, those are fantastic. But even if you were to live off the land and just use like built-in, App Locker, which is Microsoft's whitelisting, Windows Firewall. Yeah, I get you're laughing at me, but Windows Firewall with IPsec is actually pretty amazingly awesome as both a prevention and detection mechanism. If you would just try to use what you have more fully, PowerShell can do some advanced detects and prevents just by running simple scripts. Placing more emphasis on host base, especially detection. Wow, there's tons of detection capabilities on the host, instead of putting all your eggs in one basket on the network side. And again, even if it's on the network side, we still need to be looking more internal to internal, not just outbound to internal to outbound or outbound to internal. And then last but not least, perimeter security still tends to push more and fall more under compliance-driven security mindsets. I love compliance. I actually do, because again, I understand that the spirit of the compliance framework was good, and realistically, it's what gave you your budget. So you can't complain about it in one hand when you wouldn't be there without that money. But the problem is, if you focus so much on compliance, what actually ends up happening is there's a heavy focus, again, on preventative controls, less detective controls, or if they are, they're more perimeter focused rather than true modern attacks. So it's a good thing, but it is also a bad thing. So what this webcast, I hope the castle analogies, I hope the different stories I've kind of told help wrap your head around perimeter security as we know it. I'm trying to drive this home that perimeter security is not dead. The problem is the perimeter is. We still absolutely want things like next-gen firewalls, intrusion detection systems, web application firewalls, but we're going to layer all these things, use them in different ways, and we're going to achieve things like data-centric approaches or zero-trust approaches. In the next two parts of this webcast, I'm going to go into more specific technical implementations that we can do to start stacking the deck in our favor. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. I do want to real quickly call out this slide right here. This is the Tactical Detection and Data Analytics Summit. I do not make money for you attending the summit. So I am not biased other than my internal bias for pure awesomeness. If you've ever watched Kung Fu Panda with your kids, you know, in the beginning of the movie, he's like, oh, he's so awesome, and they get blinded by the light, right? That's the summit. I love it. This will be its second year. It is pure play blue team detection. It's all the different ways to catch the adversary. I'll be there co-hosting this with John Hubbard. 5:30, which is a lot of this webcast, as well as Sec 555, will be there. Recommend them, but if not, even if you just attend the summit, it would be worth your time. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Carol for questions, and we'll go from there. Please, if you have questions, type them in the bar. Go for it.
Yes, thanks for that great presentation. We do have a few questions ready for the Q&A. However, as Justin said, if anyone has a question for our presenter, please enter it into the questions window now. Justin, our first question came in at 8:50. It says, but how can I do all that with limited resources? Do you have a priority list of things to do?
Oh, see, you have to ask the hardest one right up front. I do, but it is based on expertise and preference. For example, I will routinely come in with a network security monitoring and some type of SIM. In my case, I like to do it with Security Onion, and then I'll do an Elastic Stack. That will get me much of the detective controls, but if you're not familiar with those technologies, you would not want to start there. I can have that up and running in less than a month, where some organizations it takes 6 months. If you're a heavy firewall team, just start to think about internals and internal. How would I use my like? A lot of it's just mindset. Like, we know we're good with firewalls, but we didn't do internal to internal rules. How would I do it differently? And you'll find that that's actually a pretty easy exercise. Some of it's just moving your router to your next gen firewall, because they're cheap enough and fast enough if you're not doing all the layer 7 stuff to get you prevent detect rules. And we'll start to cover some of the answers to that in the next two webcasts. But the real answer is based on what your team does well. That's what you're going to have to focus in on. And feel free to email me, which is on my GitHub, and I'll try to answer that more specifically, but it's hard to do that without knowing your background.
All right, thanks, Justin. Will we cover who is in charge of battling the giants?
You are.
Is that me or
no, the individual who asked the question? You get to take on the giant.
That's good. All right. In addition to perimeter controls, should we also control adjacent devices communication?
Absolutely. In fact, so one of the things organizations often say is that they struggle with pivoting an internal lateral movement. But I can tell you there's 6 ways from Sundays to deal with that. Even workstation to workstation, there's private VLANs, there's host-based firewalls. You could put them and segment them with an actual ACL. There's NAC, and the list goes on and on. And if you don't want to prevent stuff on accident, roll Microsoft Sysmon. Now I can automatically detect when a workstation talks to another workstation in a way it shouldn't have, without the risk of accidentally blocking it. So, resounding yes.
Thank you. Should control be more focused on the endpoints?
Control should still be on the network plus the endpoint. And I'm clarifying that because Security is a pendulum swing, right? Today, we are too heavily focused on network devices. We need to be more focused on endpoints. But now that EDR and all these other things are hitting the news mainstream, what's going to happen is in a year or two, we're going to be too focused on endpoints. We need a balance between both. Network devices are easier to centrally control. They're less complex. Endpoints, though, are much more fine-grained and can see and do more. So we need them both.
All right, thanks. I put the SANS upcoming webcast link in the chat window for those of you looking for the next 2 webcasts coming up. And someone gave you some feedback, a really good presentation. Thanks. Looking forward to the next sessions.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
Good. The next person asks, can you show the GitHub URL again?
Absolutely. There we go.
All right, thanks. How do you change the mindset of set it and forget it to tune what you have?
So the easiest way, this is not a, you're not going to like this answer, but the easiest way is to prove it. So for example, an intrusion detection system often is set it and forget it. It's not touched, it's in the closet and just dies a slow, miserable death. But the difference is if you were to tune it, you would find a lot of really cool things with it. So that's why when I ask the question as far as what I prioritize, I like network security monitoring because it's a control you should not set and forget. But if you're constantly looking at the data, you'll find things like, wow, that box, while it's not a nation state attack, it's infected and it's doing this. It's not like super critical, but wow, I found it. And what you find is you can provide this data to management. And I hate metrics, but it justifies our existence. And all of a sudden you get more things, like they trust you, you built up trust. And quite frankly, I love network security monitoring and SIM because when I do all those detection rules and I find things, all of a sudden I love my job again. It's why I'm not burnt out, is because there's a lot of joy in taking something that has traditionally been set it and forget it and using it and making it worthwhile. Instead of a $250,000 appliance sitting on the edge doing nothing, all of a sudden you're like, wow, I can use this to catch this, 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 and this. And then what you'll find yourself doing is actually, with authorization, intentionally trying to see how you could bypass it, and you just become even better blue teamer. So that's the answer. You got to prove that because you didn't set it and forget it, that it's actually a device worth keeping and valuable.
All right, thank you. Where to start for an effective internal network segmentation?
If you are starting segmentation and you've not done it before, that's where you probably need to find what's your most critical assets. From both the server side and the workstations. Critical databases, critical web applications, segment those immediately. On the workstation side, who has access to the keys of the kingdom? Help desk, if they have local admin to everything, that's a critical group. Segment them. Your folks that have domain admin access, you might actually need to implement things like a jump box, where you're forcing them to jump from their machine into a virtual desktop, a remote desktop, or an administrative workstation to use their domain admin credentials. So you segment based on the need and criticality of different assets. And also things like if you know HR shouldn't connect to anybody, that's an easy segmentation. You might private VLAN that off, or at a minimum, you'll just create a rule that says this desktop network is not allowed to reach out to any other desktop networks. And that might be your reason for segmenting them.
All right, thanks. Someone has more feedback. Amazing presentation, Justin. Really love it and can't wait to attend the upcoming ones and SEC 530 as well.
Awesome. Thank
you. This last one, it says, implementing detection tool without right policy to what to detect is useless. So is there recommended guidelines that has recommended policies?
I'm sorry, could you read that one once more?
Sure. And you know what? I'll send it to you in chat. That might help too.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. Implementing detection tool without right policy to what to detect is useless. So is there recommended guidelines that has recommended policies?
I'm assuming you're asking like what would be like for example, on a Windows, there's the audit policies. Like the default Windows settings do not log all the things we need. I'm assuming that's what you're asking. But detection by default is hard because the right things are not enabled. On Windows, we have things like audit policies, or we have third-party tools like Sysmon that give us significantly better detection capabilities. The answer to figure out what those are to take training like Sec 555. Again, I apologize, shameless advertising there on my part. There's also guides like NSA's Spotting the Adversary. It's a free PDF. It goes through tons of ways you could catch attacks on a Windows desktop or server. It applies to both. There's tons of, if you look for Blue Team or the SIM and Tactical Analytics Summit, any of those presentations on YouTube or on SlideShare, they go through the different things we can enable or specifically the things we need to look at. That GitHub that I have up on the screen, that presentations folder has tons of that. Like there's probably 10 talks on what to log, how to use it, and really in some cases how to make it even better. Where we'll take logs like google.com and we'll enrich them multiple ways. So now instead of google.com, you can tell, is it a random domain? Is it a top 1 million? When was it registered? All this information. So that presentations folder might more specifically answer what you're looking for.
All right, and they didn't clarify anything further, so I'm assuming you were able to answer it. And that's all we have today. Thank you so much, Justin, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.